And so this article is taken from 2007, and it mentioned in the past year, so that's when personal genome sequencing was really new. Researchers linked more than 50 genes to an increased risk of disease. So we're having this new conversation about what it means to be at increased risk of a particular disease. And that turns out to be a very complicated conversation. You can't find these estimates anymore of how many genes got linked last year because the number's too high. So the first year you get the count, after that it just goes up. And so they mention that while we are starting to get this sense of genes associated with particular diseases, that most of the genes that we can name have relatively small effects. And so it can be hard to tell what that small effect will mean for your health and your health risk. So here we have again in the science journals, they point out that where we are currently, that the predictive value of personal genomic information basically fails to add a whole lot to what we already can tell from personal histories and family histories and lifestyle. So still very new. This is in 2008. But just because it's new and just because it's not really ready to come off the line doesn't mean people aren't ready to make money from it. And so it points out here capitalizing on the information that's in the public realm in these genetic databases. Companies are offering genetic tests that purport to help you to make better healthcare and lifestyle decisions. And so for a relatively small fee, you can take a cheap smear and send it into these companies, and they can do scans of your genome. That's different from a whole sequencing. They can do scans of your genome and give you some data on your healthcare risks. So people have pointed out that since the meaning of this data on healthcare risks is still a little bit up in the air, that it's hard to tell whether or not you are really helping people to say you have a 1.5 times risk from your neighbor or from your brother of developing heart disease. Well, what does a 1.5 times risk mean? And that's the kind of data. So it's a new kind of data, and it often frightens people. So again, I think it's one of these things that if we can bring our understanding of ourselves and our life project to this new kind of medical data, then we're in a much better place to receive it. And so we have this idea coming up of worried well, people being told you're at an increased risk for a particular condition, but not really knowing what that actually means. Another one of the things that people talk about is the potential once, so Google is very active in this, and so there's opportunities to download all your genetic information into these public databases and stuff. So people worry that once genetic information starts to be shared much more widely, that it can in fact have a big impact on questions of discrimination. So a company might say, you have an X-fold increased risk of heart disease, and the health insurer that is our insurance agent for our company says that they'll up our insurance premiums if we hire people like you, so we can't hire you. And so there are lots of opportunities for genetic discrimination, and that's something that people are concerned about and feel that we need to take steps to guard against. And so in the United States, just a couple of years ago, they passed this Genetics Information Non-Discrimination Act in order to protect people from abusive use of genetic information. And when you think about it, whether or not you have a public or a private healthcare system makes a huge difference on the impacts of this, of the possibility of genetic discrimination. So with wonderful new possibilities of understanding how genes function in disease, there also comes a side where people need to be protected from the abuse of that information. Finally, before I wrap up, I'd like to say that most of the conversation this evening has been around what people refer to as Western developed nation medicine. And I mentioned at the beginning this idea not only of the common good, but of the global common good. Genetics and genomics has a huge possibility for improving the health of people in developing countries. This slide is about the sequencing of the genome for the parasite that causes malaria. So that the genome for the parasite was sequenced, and the genome for the mosquito that carries the parasite is sequenced. Put that information together with the human genome, and you're able to get a better sense of how that parasite gets around the human immune system to infect and cripple and kill people. And that is a profound good that could come out of this kind of genome information. And so I think, coming from a tradition that says the common good is important and that the universal common good is very important, that I think we need, as we move forward with modern genetics and genomics and stem cells in our country and in the Western world, that we also make sure that this technology is applied to the needs of the developing nations.